When I first started shooting film, I just picked up the cheapest and most accessible film that was available at the time. And that just so happened to be Kodak Color Plus. And despite it being a pretty basic film stock, I actually managed to get some pretty good photos with it. But later down the line, I actually started to explore different types of film and figure out how they were useful in different situations. So I've put together all the different types of film that I've tried for all different kinds of photographers, from budget shooters to street snappers. Now, I just want to say that everyone will get slightly different results with different kinds of film because labs scan things differently and all of your scans will come back pretty different to if I go to a different lab. But generally, the facts about these film stocks remain true. Now, I'm going to start off where most of us poor little beings start off, and that's shooting on a budget. Of course, you know where I began with Kodak Color Plus, but there are some other film stocks that really fit the bill on the budget realm. Usually if you're shooting on a budget, then you're less bothered about your pictures looking super high quality and you're more sort of bothered about having that film look. So there's kind of no place better to start off than with the OG that is Kodak Color Plus. Color Plus is kind of as basic as it gets when it comes to color film. It's got a bit of a vintage feel and it's pretty contrasty, but you can still get some good shots with it. The main problem with Color Plus, which is true for most budget films, is that it's not a very forgiving film. So if you underexpose it, then it's more likely to go wrong than if you're using a really good film. As you can see though, I still got some shots that I really love with Color Plus, so you can still go out and get some bangers with it. Alternatively, another good option is Kodak Ultramax 400, which, to be honest, I kind of hate. It's got similar attributes to Color Plus, but it's more saturated and it's got an equally bad dynamic range. The main reason that people would go for Ultramax 400 is that it's low cost and it's got 400 ISO. So it'll be slightly better in low light, but not great. Arguably the best low budget option is probably Kodak Gold. Of course, prices vary from country to country, but generally Kodak Gold is a great budget option. It's got a bit of a yellow hue to it, it's got pretty fine grain, and as I said, it's one of the better options when it comes to budget shooting. A lot of people love these sort of soft tones that Kodak Gold can give you, and it's fairly easy to see why. If I was to rank these three budget stocks, I'd probably go with Gold, Color Plus, and then Ultramax. But hang on a minute, there's more. We've got something really important coming right up. Next up, we're looking at film stocks for shooting portraits and people. You might think it'd be simple, but trust me, I've made the wrong decisions when it comes to shooting people, and it's really easily done. Generally speaking, the best things to have when it comes to shooting portraits is a film stock that renders skin tones really well and has a really good dynamic range. Generally, I would just suggest two of the Portra film stocks, but I'm going to throw a wild card in there as well. Portra 160 and 400 are two of the best film stocks for portrait work that I've used. Of course, there may be some Fuji stocks that are equally as good, if not better, but personally, I've not used them. 160 and 400 have amazing skin tones and they've got a brilliant dynamic range. Once you get them scanned or printed, then they're pretty much a bit of a blank slate, which means that you can edit them to the way you want them to be, which is a really big thing in portrait photography. Of course, you can go for Portra 800 as well. It just has a slightly different feel to 160 and 400, and it has that bit more grain. If you want that grain for a bit more texture, then of course, go for it. Those would pretty much be the stocks that I would use most of the time when it comes to shooting portraits. But if you want to go completely different, then you can go for something like Cinestill 800T. Now, I've only shot a few pictures of people with Cinestill 800T, but one of the best portraits that I've ever seen, I don't have it and I probably won't be able to find it, was on Cinestill 800T. So if you want to be a bit more creative and you want your photos to look different on purpose, then 800T might be a good option for you. and so might loads of other film stocks. I'm just going for the best ones that I would go for. Onto something that's a completely different kettle of fish: landscape photography. For landscape photography, you usually want fine grain, brilliant colours, and once again, a great dynamic range. And that's why Kodak XR100 is one of the best film stocks for landscape photography. XR100 is pretty saturated and it's got a great dynamic range, which means that you're more likely to get a well-exposed picture all the way through the shot, which is much more important than a lot of different types of photography, because in landscape photography, there could be a really bright sky and really dark, hills or whatever. Also, XR100 being a 100 ISO film stock means that it's much more clear and crisp, which most landscape photographers tend to value. Be aware that light skin tones will usually be rendered quite red, so if you're going to shoot people with XR100, probably just don't. Although I'm not much of a landscape photographer, I kind of have a soft spot for XR100, but there's just not that many situations where I would need to use it. Otherwise, a lot of people would go for Portra 160 or Portra 400 for landscape photography, especially if you're wanting to edit your photos quite a lot. Once again, obviously they've got all that dynamic range, and they're just generally really good film stocks. They're super versatile, which is why they're pretty good for all different kinds of photography. But I do want to mention some film stocks that I have not shot, but I know are really good. Kodak Ektachrome E100 and Fuji Velvia 100, which are both color positive film stocks, so they require different kinds of processing and they're also a bit harder to shoot, are two incredibly good landscape film stocks. Fuji Velvia tends to produce beautiful greens, as most Fuji film stocks do, so if you're shooting particularly green landscapes, then it might be one to think about. And Ektachrome, again, just produces beautiful colors. These are top tier landscape film stocks. If I was rating these film stocks, I'd put the positive film right at the top, then XR100, then the Portra films for this particular thing, because the Portra film is more versatile, probably more catered really to portrait photography, and the positive film is just top tier. Okay, so we're going to go on to something that most of us have done in our lives, and that's travel. Traveling with film can be a little bit complicated because when you travel through airports, there's a chance that the scanners can damage the film that you've got. You've got some options. You can either chance it and go through and see if it'll get damaged. You can try and get it hand checked, or you can buy your film at your location and try and get it developed at your location. I've done two of those things. I've never tried to get my film hand checked. Personally, I've never had any problems with airport scanners, but I do know that they're progressively getting worse. I guess there are a few versions of a travel shooter. There might be a casual travel shooter that just wants to take fun pictures, or there might be, like me, the kind of travel shooter that wants to take the best possible photo that I can wherever I am. For the shooter that just wants to get pissed up and take pictures of their mate getting their arse tattooed, then Kodak Gold is the film stock for you. It's ideal for summer days, it's cheap, it's a great option. A middle alternative that's still got an interesting vibe to it could be something like Cinestill 400D. 400D is really warm and it's got that halation as well, so it'll give your holiday like a real weird vibe and a cool feeling to it. It's a bit more than Kodak Gold, but it's not as much as the Portra 400s of the world. Speaking of which, if you want to get high quality shots while you're on your holidays, I think Portra 400 or Lomo 400 is a good option because it's versatile. And when you're on your holiday, when you're traveling, you could be in so many different types of situations and taking pictures of so many different types of things. Lomo 400 could be a slightly cheaper option that's still good and has got a good dynamic range. Portra 400 is probably the top tier of what you would usually take traveling. Who could forget? Is street photography. I think in street photography, there's a lot more personal choice when it comes to what kind of film you shoot. So of course, it's totally up to you what you use, and there's not really a one size fits all or a rule to what you should use while shooting street. If you're shooting street on a budget, then something like Fuji Superior 400 Extra or Lomo 400 might be alright, because yes, it's not quite, really low budget, but it's middle ground and it'll help you still get some really good shots. Of course, I shot street photography with Kodak Color Plus for quite a long time, and it did a pretty good job. It's not got a good dynamic range though, and that's one of the big things I think with street photography, because your light situations could be changing all the time and you could have some really hard contrasts that Kodak Color Plus isn't going to do very well with. Once again, for something different, you could go for Cinestill 800T, especially if you're shooting in the night time and you want to get halation and you want to get sort of these greeny hues that are in the shot, and in the daytime you get the bluey sort of hues. It's almost sort of cinematic for some reason, and it has got a good dynamic range as well, so Cinestill 800T could be a good idea for someone that wants to be a bit more creative with it and take different kind of photos. But I would say that top tier really is probably something like Portra 800, because of so many reasons. It's really versatile, but also that 800 ISO just means that no matter what kind of light you've got, even if you've gone indoors or whatever, then you're still going to be able to get the shot. Also, Portra 800 looks different to 160 and 400. It's got its own kind of feel to it. I think it's from an older emulsion or something like that, and personally, I really like it. Of course, use what you want, but those are just ideas for street photography. And I did get to the end of this and thought I was done. And let's face it, there's loads of different types of photography that you could be shooting, but I feel like we've covered a lot of overlapping things. But we've not covered black and white photography. Basically, if you want cheap black and white film that's pretty good, then go for Ilford HP5. If you want really good black and white film, then go for Kodak Tri-X. Both are pretty much cheaper than most color film, but developing black and white film costs more money. I'm not sure why, but that's just the way it is. So those are the film stocks that are the best for all those different kinds of photography. With all that being said though, of course, there are so many different types of film. Someone else's favorite kind of film might be some obscure one that no one ever really heard of or uses. And I'm sure there's going to be people shouting down in the comments saying that I've missed out Pissy Pants 250D, whatever. That's fine. I was just mainly suggesting film stocks that I've used so that I can give you the best recommendations possible. Anyway, as per usual, thank you so much for watching. And of course, drop me a subscribe. It's a really helpful thing to do. And if you're really cool, maybe go and watch another video.